as I said yesterday, we will move straight on with Al-Bab al-Awwal, and then we didn't move straight on. But inshallah today, I think I'll be able to stick with that intention and move straight on, because we want to cover Al-Bab al-Thalith في المعاني والعلوم التي تضمنها القرآن, and to cover the next one as well. These are two very important chapters, among other important chapters, of course, in Ibn Juzay's introductory remarks around the Quran and around the Tafsir and around the science of Tafsir and the usul of Tafsir and around the ulum al-Quran. So this one is to do with the meanings and types of knowledge that the Quran contains, right? So he talks about that first with a sort of general overview, and then goes into a little bit more detail. Then in the next chapter, in the next bab, he goes into the sciences that are connected with studying the Quran. So these are very important to think about. In the first place, it is to understand what it is that we are actually accessing by reading the Quran, by studying it, by pondering it, and by studying the tafsir of it, right? And that is to understand, in another way of putting it, the overall purposes of the Quran, the purposes of it being revealed. And that, you know, on one level might sound like quite obvious points that are being made, but at the same time, various discussions that we sometimes have to have around the Quran and correcting certain views and interpretations as well, comes down to not having a sound conception of this issue, right? So let's proceed and see what we discover.
والعلوم التي تضمنها القرآن، ولنتكلم في ذلك على الجملة والتفصيل. أما على الجملة فاعلم أن المقصود بالقرآن دعوة الخلق إلى عبادة الله وإلى الدخول في دين الله، ثم إن هذا المقصد يقتضي أمرين لا بد منهما وإليهما ترجع معاني القرآن كله. أحدهما بيان العبادة التي دعي الخلق إليها، والآخر ذكر بواعث تبعثهم على الدخول فيها وتقودهم إليها.
Okay, so in the first place, he says, let us talk about that, or, you know, fair enough to translate it. We will talk about that in general and in detail. So the general overview, the invitation to the worship of Allah and entrance into the religion of Allah. And then this purpose requires. So a lot of times the translators here are using the word requires or demands for the word yaqtadi, which sometimes fits fine. And here is not too bad, but I usually change it either to entails, as here would be appropriate, or sometimes to denotes, because iqtida is sometimes to do with denotation of meanings, right? لا بد منهما وإليهما ترجع معاني القرآن كله, or yes, كله, because the Quran, all the meanings of the Quran relate. So the meanings of the whole Quran, it would actually be. It doesn't make a big difference in the translation. From which there is no escaping. Yeah, it's a little bit over literal, right? I think it's perfectly fine just to say two necessary matters. To which all of the meanings of the Quran relate, or literally return, right? Go back to, I might say. One of them is to make clear the worship which people are called to, and the other is mention of the incentives which will instigate entrance into it and return them repeatedly to it. So taquduhum doesn't mean return them repeatedly. It just means lead them to it. And that's a sort of repetition or just a strengthening of the preceding statement, right? تبعثهم على الدخول فيها وتقودهم إليها. It's not really a different point, but you know, also sometimes in translation we will go with that. We will translate both phrases, right? We don't have to shrink it down. It's just I made this point before that at times that wordiness is quite attractive in Arabic, and at the same time not so attractive in English. Right? Sometimes that happens. So, saying that the Quran is inviting people to worship means that we have to clarify what that worship is, what that religion is, and then there has to be in the Quran the call to that worship that indicates why people should respond to it. Okay, so to make clear is fine as bayan. Sometimes bayan is better understood as like the communication of something, conveying something, and sometimes it's better understood as making clear, right? And those meanings go hand in hand in reality. Okay.
أما العبادة فتنقسم إلى نوعين، وهما أصول العقائد وأحكام الأعمال. وأما البواعث عليها فأمران، وهما الترغيب والترهيب. وأما على التفصيل فعل.
Okay, so that's all within the ijmal, okay, the overall framework. So making clear the ibadah, and then the incentives was interest into it, and then they said, i.e. the religion, okay? Whereas what Ibn Juzayy is saying is, he's relating it back to the ibadah itself. الدخول فيها أي العبادة, right? And that was the word from the beginning. Okay, but of course ibadah and deen here are being treated as interchangeable concepts, right? دعوة الخلق إلى عبادة الله وإلى الدخول في دين الله, right? So it's seeing that as the same thing, understandably. The worship consists of two divisions: the principles of the tenets of belief and the rules governing actions. That's quite nicely put. As for the incentives to enter, it doesn't have to be talked about in terms of religion, but in terms of that worship. So we might as well just say it. There are two matters, which are targhib, the awakening of desire and longing, and tarhib, the awakening of fear. So here they've basically inserted kind of explanatory glosses, which is an understandable translation of targhib and of tarhib as well. There might be simpler terms though, which is to say encouragement and discouragement, for example. But okay, it's maybe a bit more interesting the way they put it here. But then it's not normal to write the Arabic term in transliteration and then a dash and then a translation of the term. One would put one or the other into brackets. So either if the main text we want it to reflect the Arabic word, as sometimes that makes sense, you put that in and then you put in brackets the translation. If the main text is going to be with the English terminology, then you write it and then in brackets you put the transliterated Arabic term. Right? It's not normal to break it up in the way they've done here. Okay, because it hasn't said فهو الترغيب, where is it? وهو whatever the awakening, إيقاظ الرغبة والشوق, right? Like he's not inserted a gloss like this. Right, so then into the details.
أن معاني القرآن 7، وهي علم الربوبية والنبوة والمعاد والأحكام والوعد والوعيد والقصص.
Okay. 7. It should be 7, yeah. Somebody's asking, should it be even? Right, 7, it says here. 7 وهي علم الربوبية والنبوة. Okay, so in the Arabic text here, or in the edited text here, we've got rafa of ilm and then of nubuwa, right? So the person, this editor here, has understood it as علم الربوبية والنبوة is معطوف on the word ilm, right? So he's not understanding as the knowledge of lordship, prophethood, final abode. Okay, and I'm inclined to agree with the editor in that respect. So the concepts of the Quran, the overall themes of the Quran are 7. Knowledge of lordship, and then prophethood as a theme, and the ma'ad, and ahkam, and wa'ad, and wa'id, and qasas. So not knowledge of stories and knowledge of wa'ad and not. So I think that's a mistake. So I would put like this, prophethood. The final abode, meaning the hereafter, the destination. Judgments, and I've tended to look at ahkam as rulings. Promise, so let's say promises. Threats. And stories. They put capitals, and that's okay, I suppose. As for knowledge of lordship, oh, well, there you go. Ilm al-Rububiyyah is one phrase, and then وَأَمَّا النُّبُوَّةِ, he doesn't say وَأَمَّا عِلْمُ النُّبُوَّةِ, right? So that supports the reading in the text, in the edited text. Right.
فأما علم الربوبية فمنه إثبات وجود الباري جل جلاله والاستدلال عليه بمخلوقاته، فكل ما جاء في القرآن من التنبيه على المخلوقات والاعتبار في خلقة الأرض والسماوات والحيوان والنبات والرياح والأمطار والشمس والقمر والليل والنهار وغير ذلك من الموجودات فهو دليل على خالقه.
Right. So in these phrases, majestic is His Majesty and so on, there's a typical strategy in this translation that I've seen, that usually there's a little symbol which is inserted, and then later on the publisher will convert those into honorific glyphs, right? So it's not typical to see it written out. Right? Not necessarily a problem, but just like for consistency. والاستدلال عليه بمخلوقاته, prove it by his creations, prove his existence, yes. So everything that is in the Quran drawing attention to the creations, so creations is okay, but let's say created things. والاعتبار في خلقة الأرض, and the call to consider, and we might put this in square brackets. So in asking, the listener, the reader, to do i'tibar, or to take lesson from the creation of the earth, heavens, animals, plants, winds, and rains. We do say rains in English, I think that's okay. The sun and the moon, the night and the day, and other creations. We'll keep creations here. Oh, existent beings, al-mawjudat. Is a proof of its creator. Dalil, for the most part, we would translate as evidence over proof. And in fact, I think in order to make his point clearer, I will say provided as evidence of their creator. Although, so ala khaliqihi is returning back to the word ma, I suppose, kullu ma ja'a. And then the min bayaniya spelled out all these things. Right? So everything that is in the Quran drawing attention to created things, and the call to consider the creation of the earth, heavens, animals, plants, etc., is provided as evidence of their creator. Right? So he's saying this is the purpose of the Quran, talking about these things. He's not just telling you that created things are evidence of the Creator. His point here is about the Quran, that when it talks about these things, they are presented as evidence of the Creator. And that's important. You know, this kind of slogan that some people have said, that the Quran is a book of science, not a book of science, right? Not science, but signs, right? So that's actually a useful statement to some extent, because to understand that the Quran is not presenting these things in their own right, so that we learn about the heavens and the earth and the creations. But usually it is saying, do they not see how it is like this? So the Quran, for the most part, is relying on people's awareness of their surroundings, asking them to ponder on those surroundings. And for sure that instills within you the kind of spirit that leads to scientific inquiry, right? And scientific inquiry then can strengthen faith, as well as making life on earth more effective, and all the positive things about science that can be said. But in and of itself, the Quran is not telling you the information as if it was a science textbook. Instead, the points are made there to lead to the grand purposes, which have been mentioned already, establishing the true ibadah for Allah, and the reasons that people should accept that truth, that the oneness of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the existence of the Creator. وَمِنْهُ إِثْبَاتُ الْوَحْدَانِيَّةِ. So, as well as the existence of Allah, it is also the oneness of Allah. Now, some people have said that the former thing doesn't really exist in the Quran because the Quran was not addressing atheists. That is a point that has to be considered, right? For the most part, the emphasis is on the oneness of Allah rather than the existence of Allah. And there is little to no direct mention of the negation of the Creator altogether, because most of the discussion in the Quran is around the mushrikeen and then the Jews and the Christians, all of whom affirmed the Creator in their various ways. And the mushrikeen of Mecca are described as people who, when you ask them who created the heavens and the earth and so on and so on, they would answer Allah. So they recognize the existence of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala while doing shirk. But that doesn't mean that there isn't a message directed towards those who negate the existence of the Creator. And that message would then become more important when the Quran is being, the guidance of the Quran is being brought to people of that description, not least in our times nowadays, right? So then we have, let's say first, there is establishing the Maker. That needs some fixing in the sentence, okay? And then we can say second, because you need some sense of the structure here. There's affirmation of the oneness.
ومنه إثبات الوحدانية والرد على المشركين والتعريف بصفات الله من الحياة والعلم والقدرة والسمع والبصر وغير ذلك من أسمائه وصفاته وتنزيهه عما لا يليق به.
Okay. So, وتنزيهه, it seems that the translators have taken that as if it was a third point. And arguably it could be, but yeah, well, I'm not going to stick in the word third here, right? Because I'm not going to see it as a particularly separate point. Okay, if you really wanted to make it a third point, I do believe he would have written وَمِنْهُ تَنْزِيهُهُ تَعَالَى عَمَّا لَا يَلِيقُ بِهِ. The oneness, refutation of those who associate partners, identification, التعريف بصفات الله من الحياة والعلم والقدرة. So identification, ta'rif. So it's the ta'rif here is like introducing or presenting, outlining. Identification could work, you know. There is also the purifying him. You see how this is not very fluent sounding, right? There's also the purifying him. If we remove that, it helps. Purifying him, or declaring him exalted above whatever thought or concept is not befitting to him. Yeah. So someone's suggesting defining for ta'rif. Of course, in many contexts, we will use defining for ta'rif. But it's more introducing, because the Quran is not defining any sifat, right? That's the job of the mutakallimin, right?
أما النبوة فإثبات نبوة الأنبياء عليهم السلام على العموم، ونبوة محمد صلى الله عليه وسلم على الخصوص، وإثبات الكتب التي أنزلها الله عليهم، ووجود الملائكة الذين كان منهم وسائط بين الله وبينهم، والرد على من كفر بشيء من ذلك. وينخرط في سلك هذا ما ورد في القرآن من تأنيس النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم وكرامته، والثناء عليه وعلى سائر الأنبياء صلى الله عليه وعليهم أجمعين.
Okay, so that's that translation looks reasonable. وكرامته, though, I don't know if there's another version of this. Oh, okay, interesting that some editions have got وكذا أمته or وكذا أمته, maybe. وَلَعَلَّهُ تَصْحِيفٌ. So let's consider that for a moment, right? Let's consider the other, reading which is presented in the footnote in one of the manuscripts, right? So part of the nubuwah would be the consolation of the Prophet ﷺ. I don't see how the consolation of the ummah falls within nubuwah, right? So I'm inclined to agree with them that it's tasheef, right? So تأنيس النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم وكرامته ما ورد. So that's a bit tricky. That's a bit tricky as a reading as well. So they've said honoring him, but his karama is his honor. من تأنيس النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم ومن كرامته والثناء عليه. It's almost like that could be one point, just said in two different ways. His honoring and praising him, of consoling the Prophet صلى الله عليه وسلم, honoring and praising him. Let's just put it like that. But the karama is his honor. والثناء عليه. So it's not takreem. That's the difference. So thana is a transitive verb, right? Well, with the ala, okay, so it indicates that the praising of him. But the karama is different from saying takreem. That's maybe the difficulty here in understanding the ibara itself. But the overall meaning is clear, not difficult.
وأما المعاد فإثبات الحشر وإقامة البراهين عليه، والرد على من خالف فيه، وذكر ما في الدار الآخرة من الجنة والنار والحساب والميزان وصحائف الأعمال وكثرة الأهوال وغير ذلك.
Okay, so that's all right for al-ma'ad. You've got this min bayaniya, again, has been translated in a fairly direct way. And a mention of that which is in the abode of the next life of the garden and fire. Right, so this is not a good way to translate the sentence. That's just following the Arabic syntax. And a mention of that which is in the abode of the next life of the garden and the fire. So in English, a reader is not really going to understand what just happened there, right? This of. So either you sort of switch around the sentence, or you stick with the sentence as it is, and you use a better expression than just this of. And the mention of what is in the next life, what is in the abode of the next life, in terms of garden and fire, reckoning and weighing, books of deeds, maybe in terms of something of that nature, right? As you can see, I'm not here putting in the final translation or the final edit, right? The text needs a fair amount of work, but I'm drawing attention to some of the main things and some of the recurring things and some of the things that you might not spot, so that we can just benefit from comparing between the text and the translation. Is mediums okay? وسائط. Okay. So you're saying ووجود الملائكة الذين كان منهم وسائط بين الله وبينهم. ووجود الملائكة الذين كان منهم وسائط. Okay. The existence of the angels, of whom there are those who are mediums between Allah and them. Yeah, the prophets. Mediums is fine. I don't really see a problem. I don't really see a problem with mediums here. Including the garden. Yeah, so min bayaniya as including, it could be, but sometimes the min bayaniya, what's going to follow it, is an exhaustive list. So you would use including if the list is not exhaustive. But if the list after it is exhaustive, then including would not be suitable. Here, it probably could be suitable.
وأما الأحكام فهي الأوامر والنواهي وتنقسم 5 أنواع: واجب ومندوب وحرام ومكروه ومباح ومنها.
Okay, so judgments, as you know, I'm inclined to change these to the rulings. Awamir wa nawahi, which are divided into 5 types: obligatory, recommended, forbidden, disapproved, and permitted. Right. So you see how this is following a sort of standard way. You put the English term, and then because of the importance of the Arabic term, it is retained, but in brackets. Right. So this is normal. What we saw before with the dashes and all that was not normal. And also that's inconsistent, isn't it? Of them there is.
ما يتعلق بالأبدان كالصلاة والصيام.
So this idea of يتعلق, again, can be translated in different ways. You could say that which is connected. That's all right. I think I prefer, though, that which pertains to. Pertains to.
يتعلق بالأموال كالزكاة وما يتعلق بالقلوب كالإخلاص والخوف والرجاء وغير ذلك. وأما الوعد فمنه وعد بخير الدنيا من النصر والظهور وغير ذلك.
Okay, so I don't know why we seem to be having a little bit of confusion around the denotation of min bayaniya, right? So as we said, yeah, so consisting of, actually that's a good one. So min bayaniya is like almost, in some cases, maps quite nicely onto the English i.e., which is Latin id est, right? Namely, viz, right? So an mention of that which is in the abode of the next life, or even like a colon, namely, i.e., right, the garden, the fire. So it's nothing to do with whether it's exhaustive or not exhaustive. But if you were to use the word including, then you are implying that the list afterwards is non-exhaustive, and that's not something implied by min bayaniya, right? Min bayaniya would give you the impression of you're explaining the previous thing by telling what you meant by it, right? So you mentioned it with ijmal, and then you're doing bayan of the ijmal. The ijmal is ma fi dar al-akhirah, whatever it was said there. Min, yeah, namely, right? And sometimes consisting of would be appropriate, but not here, not in this case. Right, so hopefully that helps. Min bayaniya is one of my favorite things, by the way. I talk about it a lot.
ومنه بخير الآخرة وهو الأكثر كأوصاف الجنة ونعيمها. وأما الوعيد فمنه تخويف بالعقاب في الدنيا ومنه تخويف بالعقاب في الآخرة وهو الأكثر كأوصاف جهنم وعذابها وأوصاف القيامة وأهوالها.
Okay, so wa'ad and wa'id, some of it is a promise pertaining to this world. Okay, so, and quite reasonably they put this square bracket here, promise to the believers of the best of this world. بِخَيْرِ الدُّنْيَا. Okay, that's fine. I mean, khayr could be seen here as just the goodness, good things of this world, but they're taking it as a ismu tafdeel, which is reasonable, I think, of the best of this world, such as help and victory. And other than that, so such as here is fine because he's got here وَغَيْرِ ذَلِكَ. But then you have this redundancy. If you're going to say such as help and victory, then why would you say and other than that? So either you indicate the non-exhaustiveness of the list by such as, which is not the meaning of min, by the way, or you indicate it with وَغَيْرِ ذَلِكَ. If you do both, you have redundancy, which again is something that might be stylistically okay in Arabic, but not so in English. It's like if you said e.g. and then you put a list and you wrote etc. Right? You either have the e.g. or you have the etc. It doesn't make sense the e.g. etc. If you do that, it shows that you're just trying to upset your editor. Can you say of help and victory? You can, but then it's not very clear the of. This is what I'm saying. Min bayaniya is for bayan, right? So wa'adun bi khayr dunya in the form of being nasr and dhuhur, etc. Right? You could even say namely, or you can say i.e. help, help and victory. But then because I've said i.e., now I have to restore what I took away of وَغَيْرِ ذَلِكَ, because he's not saying it's only these two things. And in fact, if you say the way it's translated here doesn't lend itself to using the word of, right? If you translate the bit before it in a different way, you could use the word of. So the good things, the good worldly things of help and victory, even then it doesn't sound very smooth, does it? So I want to say, try to not get too stuck on very formulaic ways of taking the Arabic into English, right? So there's certain ways that are natural to speak in Arabic that just don't translate well. They translate well, but what you have to do is translate them well and not just take it directly on a one-to-one correspondence of the words. And of it, yes, that's a perfect example of a really bad way of transferring the Arabic words too directly into English without thinking about how to word it. وَمِنْهُ, even if you said and from it. وَأَمَّا الْوَعْدِ, as for the promise, of it there is the promise, right? You see, there are so many better ways that you can say this. Among its types, or among it, maybe something like this. But it's not. It's stunted English, isn't it? And of it there is the promise of the best of the next life, and it is the majority. And it is the majority. وَهُوَ الْأَكْثَرُ, which you would say, which is the majority. You don't say, and it is the majority. In Arabic, it sounded perfect. وَمِنْهُ بِخَيْرِ الْآخِرَةِ وَهُوَ الْأَكْثَرُ. So there's hadf of the word wa'dun, okay, which is normal, right? Because you've got an atf. There's no need to repeat that part. Okay. And of it, there is the promise of the best of the next life, which is the majority. And I don't think this big bracket thing here is needed. As I pointed out to you before, sometimes the translators have stuck things in round brackets, which is their own insertion. This is an example of it. In other places, they've used a square bracket. So it's very important to have consistency here. The square bracket is the convention for insertions of the translators. Round brackets they've used earlier for a parenthesis of the author. So this one should be in square brackets. And in actual fact, it's clear enough, I think, in meaning without that parenthesis at all. And I might use a different way of parenthesizing this, because it is a parenthesis itself. وهو الأكثر كأوصاف الجنة ونعيمها.
وتأمل القرآن تجد.
So you got a suggestion here, among them being help, victory, and other than that. Just ask yourself, does it sound like English? Right? Among them being help, victory, and other than that. Like, who speaks like that? I know even it's a book, right? So who writes like that even in English? This is translator speak. This is Arabic translator speak. I'm going to shake the temptation to write things like an Arabic translator. Write things like an English writer. Why would you say among them being help, victory, and other than that? Why would you say that instead of such as help and victory? What is the advantage that's gained? What is the meaning that is imparted by among them help, victory, and other than that we don't get from such as help and victory? Billahi alaykum.
عاد مقرونا بالوعيد قد ذكر أحدهما على إثر ذكر الآخر ليجمع بين الترغيب والترهيب وليتبين أحدهما بالآخر كما قيل فبضدها تتبين الأشياء.
Okay. So this is the wa'id, and then he just makes a note that this point is these things come paired together. ليجمع بين الترغيب والترهيب. So they've translated it this way before, awakening of longing with the awakening of fear, which we can keep. It's not that bad, but it, you know, if we change it before, then we'll change it here as well. In order to unite, I would probably use something like to juxtapose. I know it's a fancier word, a harder word, but just in the sense of placing them next to each other rather than to unite. But unite is not too bad. And so that one will become distinct from the other. Not distinct from the other. That is not his point. لِيَتَبَيَّنَ أَحَدُهُمَا بِالْآخَرِ, not مِنَ الْآخَرِ. So what does he mean here? So that each will become clear with reference to the other. There might be other ways of putting it, right? Each one becomes clear in comparison or in contrast with the other as well. So you're asking, وَتَأَمَّلَ الْقُرْآنِ, does it mean ponder the Quran or does it mean consider the Quran? It means look closely at the Quran, right? So not ponder in the sort of necessarily the istilahi sense, which nobody quite knows what pondering is right now. So there's a lot of talk about the pondering and not very much clarity on what pondering is. But ta'ammul is considering something carefully. So consider the Quran is okay, but I would say look closely at the Quran or study the Quran closely. And tadabbur also can mean this when you have أَفَلَا يَتَدَبَّرُونَ الْقُرْآنَ, and it's talking about the unbelievers. وَلَوْ كَانَ مِنْ عِنْدِ غَيْرِ اللَّهِ لَوَجَدُوا فِيهِ اخْتِلَافًا كَثِيرًا. They're not being told to do tadabbur in the sense that we do as believers. We're reading and we're thinking about the meanings and the guidance. And they're being told to examine the Quran. That's tadabbur in that ayah. Okay? Now we can extend the meaning and connect it to the other meanings. That's fine. But I'm just saying in the first place when they're told أَفَلَا يَتَدَبَّرُونَ الْقُرْآنَ, is that don't back off and chicken out of examining it. No, examine it closely. Here it is. Take it, look, find the inconsistencies that you are looking for in order to conclude that it's from other than Allah. No, not reflection. Not reflection. So I'm just saying, don't go with the first word that sort of appears that we'd use in other contexts. تأملوا مقصد الإمام ibn Juzayy. Okay, he's saying when you look through the Quran, you will see the wa'ad with the wa'id. That's ta'ammul of the Quran as a whole, rather than ta'ammul of a particular ayah at one time, which might be called pondering right? Reflection. You keep throwing these words back at me. I don't know if you're listening to what I'm saying. Don't just go with the first word that you're used to seeing about this term used in another context. Read it in context. So ponder is fine. It can be fine, but the first word that was there was perfectly fine as well. Consider. All I did was make it a little bit clearer by saying, look closely through the Quran. Even that would be even clearer. How can we do that? You're going to fight with me, and if you translate it yourselves, you can write ponder, reflect, whatever you like. By their opposites, things become clear, right? So in this edition, they've kind of made clear that this comes from a poetic line. Yeah. Don't worry, everyone. By the way, I love your suggestions, even if they make me laugh, and even if I shout at you, because it's a thought process, right? And I want us to think together. And you know, over time, you will understand why I'm being the way I am, right? Don't take it to heart. Don't be upset, inshallah.
وأما القصص فهو ذكر أخبار الأنبياء المتقدمين وغيرهم كقصة أصحاب الكهف وذي القرنين. فإن قيل ما الحكمة في تكرار قصص الأنبياء في القرآن؟
Now you notice, of course, he's using the word qasas and not the word qisas. So typically with the Quran, we talk about qasas al-Quran rather than qisas al-Quran. There's no big problem with saying qisas. It's just a slightly different terminology, because in the Quran we have the word qasas, we have a surah al-Qasas, we have various ayat that mention, for example, نحن نقص عليك أحسن القصص, Surah Yusuf. So qasas means, first of all, the process of laying out the story, right? So it's a masdar. قص يقص قصا وقصصا, right? Which is also, you can say اقتصاص, right? اقتصاص, which is the process of telling the story. So then it can also refer to the maqsus, right? To the, if we use the passive participle, the thing that is told. So it can refer then to the stories, right? Qisas is the plural of qissa, which is one instance of a story, right? So then qisas is multiple individual stories. So that meaning is okay, but qasas is the terminology that we usually use in this regard. So using the word stories here is okay. They consist of mention of information on the previous prophets. Yeah, so commentator is right to say that sounds a little bit strange. Information on the previous prophets. You see here they've got this pie, right? That's because, as I was saying to you, there is a system in this translation of certain symbols which are going to be replaced, you know, in one go. And this, I guess, is alayhimus salam, pie. And of others, such as the story of the companions of the cave of Dhul Qarnayn. Right. ذكر أخبار الأنبياء المتقدمين وغيرهم. So their news, also not news really. I don't think news, because it's not like an update. News is an update because it's new, right? How else could we word this? I think that's why they went with information rather than the news, but I still think it is a little bit funny. If it is said, this is the question, ما الحكمة في تكرار, and by the way, takrar is right. A lot of people say tikrar, but it should be takrar. Narrations of and about events. The events of the... To be honest, with the word information, they've got fairly close to the import of the word akhbar in this context, right? Narrations of... mention of narrations. It's not narrations, right? The Quran is not containing narrations from elsewhere. The Quran is the narration. What about dropping the word? Yunus is on a dropping flex today, right? Dropping the word work. Would that work? Like mention of the previous prophets. I mean, that would still make sense, yeah. But then he could have said فهو ذكر الأنبياء المتقدمين, but he wants to say فهو ذكر أخبار الأنبياء. So he wants to talk about what happened with them. What did they do? What was the events of their life is kind of. In fact, if you said events of the lives, we'd have to sort of make the expression longer in English than it was in Arabic, rather than shorter. You don't have to say the previous prophets, you just say previous prophets and others. You could go with that with akhbar, because information just sounded a little bit strange because of the Quran bringing information. I don't know, it just doesn't seem like the right tone, right? Question, can we say that al-qasas can only be news narrations that have happened, whereas al-qasas can include fiction? I don't know if that would apply as a rule in general usage of the Arabic language. I don't think that it would. I suppose al-qasas could be used elsewhere for fictional things. I don't see why not, because as a masdar of telling the events, right, one after the other. Qassa min tatabba'a, right, to follow one thing from another. So telling a story, whether that story be true or imagined, I should think that the word would be the same word, right? So what about the repetition of these stories? Then the answer has three aspects. Okay. Now, oftentimes you have this فَإِنْ قِيلَ فَالْجَوَابُ كَذَا. In qila is translated here directly, if it is said, and that's fine. Sometimes I prefer to just shorten it by saying, and this is what I did with the Tafsir al-Razi, sometimes I would just put as a word, query or objection, right? Because sometimes there is an objection. So just to help make clearer, فَإِنْ قِيلَ قُلْتُ. But here is translated directly, if it is said, then the answer has three aspects. What he means here is that, well, we have to check here by reading it, that there are three possible answers. Okay, so rather than saying the answer has three aspects, which is a direct translation, we have to see, what does he mean by three aspects? There are three possible answers, but they are not necessarily compatible answers with each other. So then it would be three possible answers. If those three answers can sort of add up to become all of them true and part of the answer, then we could say the answer has three aspects. But when he says فَالْجَوَابُ مِنْ ثَلَاثَةِ أَوْجُهٍ, it can mean the first thing, right? Which is mutually exclusive possible answers.
فالجواب من ثلاثة أوجه. الأول أنه ربما ذكر في سورة من أخبار الأنبياء ما لم يذكر في سورة أخرى، ففي كل واحدة منهما فائدة زائدة على الأخرى. الوجه الثاني أنه ذكرت أخبار الأنبياء في مواضع على طريقة الإطناب، وفي مواضع على طريقة الإيجاز، لتظهر فصاحة القرآن في الطريقتين. الوجه الثالث أن أخبار الأنبياء قصد بذكرها مقاصد كثيرة، فتعدد ذكرها بتعدد تلك المقاصد. فمن المقاصد بها إثبات نبوة الأنبياء المتقدمين بذكر.
Okay, so I think this last point is an extension of the wajh al-thalith, but let's have a look. First, that he probably, ربما doesn't mean probably. As we said before, it could mean sometimes, or it'd be okay to say he might mention information on the prophets. And of course, we've said here that the word information had a little bit of raised a bit of a question mark. من أخبار الأنبياء ما لم يذكر في سورة أخرى. Should we add the ضمير الشأن in the first point? You guys have been studying Damir al-Sha'n with Sheikh Salman. I think you're getting obsessed with it. أنه ربما ذكر. Okay. So, yeah, if ذكر في سورة من أخبار ما لم يذكر في سورة أخرى. Well, you know, you could have read this أنه تعالى ربما ذكر في سورة ما لم يذكر في سورة أخرى. That's possible. أنه ذكرت. Good point, Yunus. So there is a so the he is not actually really in the text. The أنه is not intended to be the dhamir referring to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So that's true. So let's try this. There might be mentioned in one surah which is not mentioned in another surah. Okay, happy with that? And then ففي كل واحد منهما, this part of the text is missing. والوجه الثاني, and then they've said this in the passive voice correctly. أنه ذكرت أخبار الأنبياء, mentioned someplace by way of, rather in the way of, let's say by way of lengthy description, and in other places by way of concision. لتظهر فصاحة القرآن في الطريقتين, so that the eloquence of the Quran should become clear in both ways. No, that's okay, but I want the point to be a little bit clearer than that, which is that the purpose of that is so that the eloquence of the Quran is demonstrated. Let's say that in both ways. Okay, so that is to say, it is part of the fasaha of the Quran and the balagha of the Quran and the i'jaz of the Quran that the same thing, the same story can be told in different formats, sometimes concisely and sometimes in a more extended way, a more detailed way. Right. Thirdly, that he intends, again, the passive reading which is indicated here does seem to fit Ibn Juzay's wording here. So that this is to say various purposes are intended. Well, I already tried manifest and then I changed it to demonstrate it. Third, that various purposes are intended by mentioning the information on the prophets. It sounds more and more strange, doesn't it? The more time that the word akhbar is given as information. In fact, you could at this point just say the stories. If we call it by mentioning the stories of the prophets, that would be perfectly fine at this point. Okay. قُصِدَ بِذِكْرِهَا مَقَاصِدُ كَثِيرَةٌ, so that their mention is multiplied with the multiplication of those purposes. Right, so that's a very direct translation of this Arabic expression, فَتَتَعَدَّدُ or فَتَعَدَّدَ ذِكْرُهَا بِتَعَدُّدِ تِلْكَ الْمَقَاصِدِ. So we don't want to take that and then just do again a word for word, so that their mention is multiplied with the multiplication of those purposes. Like if you're thinking as an Arab and you're reading this, you understand that, oh, beautiful, oh, wallahi, perfect, right? If you're just an English reader, third, that various purposes are intended by mentioning the information of the prophets, so that their mention is multiplied with the multiplication of those purposes. Okay, so they are mentioned in as many times as there are purposes. See that? No, mine was better, Yunus, sorry. You're saying so that they are mentioned multiple times in accordance with the multiple purpose. That's okay. Well, let's leave that. We don't need that. Sorry, I've been doing this longer than you. So they are mentioned as many times as there are purposes. Okay. Should needs to be deleted from your reconstruction of the sentence. What should? Which sentence? There might be information the Prophet mentioned. Should, okay. So that the eloquence of the Quran is demonstrated in both ways. By the way, don't worry too much about these things. I mean, I went to look at it just now, but I'm going to be reading it properly when I'm not talking to however many 30 odd people on my back, right? Okay. And is mentioned said twice okay? Here you mean intended by mentioning the information, so they're mentioned as many times. Saying the word mentioned twice would be okay, but I don't like that whole sentence, frankly, right? So as an editor, I will come back and absolutely change that sentence. Bearing in mind that this whole project, because I'm working on the entire translation of the Tafsir, and I only have so much time, that, you know, wherever it's possible just to accept what the translators came up with, I will try to do so, and try not to always go with what my preferred wording would have been. If I can work with what they've done, then that's fine. But if I were to translate this from scratch, I would word things very differently in most cases. But that's just because I'm a different translator from the person who translated it first. Okay, and I don't intend to redo the whole thing, but rather to check and improve the whole thing. Right? So we have to be also judicious with our time. I still got Razi Volume 2 on the burner. Okay, so we've got things to get done at the same time as this. Okay. Their mention is multiplied with the multiplication of these purposes, right? You can see now why I got rid of that, inshallah. Now, فَمِنَ الْمَقَاصِدِ بِهَا وَمِنْهَا وَمِنْهَا وَمِنْهَا. So we've got this list up until the end of the chapter. So, in a way, this is under point 3. And what they've done is they put this all in one paragraph. I would say this would work very nice as a numbered list. And then I would just say, like this. I'm not sure about this, how those ones are different. Let's have it.
ما جرى على أيديهم من المعجزات وذكر إهلاك من كذبهم بأنواع من الهلاك، ومنها إثبات نبوة محمد صلى الله عليه وسلم لإخباره بتلك الأخبار من غير تعلم من أحد.
So although because it's not too bad, I think he wants to say in that, to establish the Prophet of Muhammad in that he informed us of these stories without learning them from anyone.
وإلى ذلك الإشارة بقوله تعالى: ما كنت تعلمها أنت ولا قومك من قبل هذا. ومنها إثبات الوحدانية. ألا ترى أنه لما ذكر إهلاك الأمم الكافرة قال: فما أغنت عنهم آلهتهم التي يدعون من دون الله من شيء. ومنها الاعتبار في قدرة الله تعالى وشدة عقابه لمن كفر به. ومنها تسلية النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم عن تكذيب قومه له بالتأسي بمن تقدم من الأنبياء، كقوله: ولقد كذبت رسل من قبلك، ومنها تأنيسه عليه السلام ووعده بالنصر كما نصر الأنبياء الذين من قبله، ومنها تخويف الكفار بأن يعاقبوا كما عوقب الكفار الذين من قبلهم، إلى غير ذلك مما احتوت عليه أخبار الأنبياء من العجائب والمواعظ واحتجاج الأنبياء وردهم على الكفار وغير ذلك.
Okay, so a lot of min bayaniya here and a lot of stunted English translation, unfortunately. And so on of that which the stories of the Prophet contain, of astonishing things, exhortations and the arguments of the prophets, and their refutation of the unbelievers, etc. Okay, unfortunately they did use an etc. here, but the of thing doesn't sit well in English. إلى غير ذلك مما احتوت عليه أخبار الأنبياء من العجائب والمواعظ. So this is to say the purposes are more than just these 7. So I'm just going to highlight that in order to come back to reword this paragraph. Of that which and so on of that which the stories of the prophets contain. Does it mean anything? Of astonishing things, exhortations and the arguments of the prophets and the refutation of the unbelievers, etc. Since the stories of the prophets,
فلما كانت أخبار الأنبياء تفيد فوائد كثيرة ذكرت في مواضع كثيرة ولكل مقام مقال.
Okay, so that's nicely put. Lamma, since for lamma is a good choice. Since they show many different types of benefit, they are mentioned in many different places. And for each station, there is a teaching. So of course, this is a very common expression, وَلِكُلِّ مَقَامٍ مَقَالٍ, which is to say, every circumstance has its own thing to be said at that point, right? So there's an appropriate way of putting it, appropriate thing to bring up. For every station, there's a teaching. I'm not sure is a good way of rendering that. Okay, so my intention was that we would do both of these babs today, but obviously the next chapter is actually quite a considerably busy one. And it's possible we could just do a part of it so that we save some time. We can do a part of it, just maybe for the next few minutes, maybe the first page of it. Okay, so what he's going to talk about here are the various types of science which are connected to the Quran. So I told you before that I want us to conceptualize the idea that the Quran itself is carrying ilm. Okay, so our goal is to get to that ilm and to benefit from that knowledge that we get from the Quran. That's what I really think he means by في علوم التنزيل, التسهيل لعلوم التنزيل. I noticed Sheikh al-Tayyar, when talking about it, indicates that Ibn Juzayy wanted us to understand that he's going to have some aspects of ulum al-Quran in his book, which may be scattered in different parts of the tafsir, or you could say the introductions themselves are some ulum al-tanzil, which, you know, he's done the tasheel of them. So that's all plausible, but I really think that based on some things and the way he said them, he really means the ulum, as in all the things, that the types of knowledge that the Quran contains. He is making it easier for you to appreciate them within this genre which is called tafsir, right? Although he doesn't put the word tafsir in his title. And that's important because I think that there's a lot of confusion nowadays about what tafsir is. That's something I don't want to expand on at this point in time. But what tafsir is and what tafsir isn't. Let me tell you about, for example, what is said about the tafsir of Imam al-Razi, right? And as you know, I'm a translator of tafsir al-Razi, the great exegesis. And I can't tell you how often people are telling me, oh, you know, fihi kullu shay'in lit-tafsir, ha ha ha. Well, I've not heard that one before. It contains everything except tafsir, which was a jibe that was directed towards it by some of the ulama. And other ulama responded to it by saying, بل فيه كل شيء مع التفسير, right? Rather, Tafsir al-Razi contains everything along with tafsir. And what that comes down to is when you look at a book like Mafatih al-Ghaib of al-Razi, and you find that it has this vast array of information and of types of discussion around the Quran and reflections on the Quran, some of them more directly to do with language or to do with narrations, and other things that become more like philosophical tangents, even sometimes scientific discussions. I've also had to translate sometimes to do with like structure of mountains, and so things which can sometimes be taking you quite a distance away from what the ayah was originally talking about. These things can be deemed as tangential, but they may have a relation to the tafsir, which may be stronger or weaker. So I'm comfortable with the idea that there's something which is the very core of tafsir, and then there are different layers which can come further out from the core of that tafsir. But as long as it's still enabling us to appreciate the meanings of the Quran, it is still tafsir, right? So tafsir which pertains to the words, this is called what I call the text analysis, or the tafsir which pertains to the context of those words, which I call pretext, which is to say the revelatory context or the page context and the flow of the words on the page. So that's also part of tafsir. It's essential in order to understand the Quran. Or even things which are derived from the ayah, this I call post-text. Okay, and this I've talked about in my thesis introduction, if you want to digest this more slowly. Things which are derived from the ayah are also part of tafsir because they're telling us something that the ayah means. Right? It means it by implication, because something that we can derive from it was in some sense in it. Right? Something we derive from the ayah was in the ayah, but waiting to be drawn out. And if you do it right, then you've drawn out something that was actually in the ayah. So that is also a form of tafsir, a part of tafsir. Arguably, it is the purpose of tafsir is to derive the lessons and to draw things out. Okay, so in that sense, all the other things can be considered part of tafsir as well. Or if you don't want to call it tafsir, you call it something else, right? If you want to define tafsir in a very narrow way and consider those things not tafsir, then it's fine, because Allah Azza wa Jalla did not actually tell us in the Quran that there's something that we have to do called tafsir, right? He did tell us to do tadabbur of the Quran, right? So we mentioned أَفَلَا يَتَدَبَّرُونَ الْقُرْآنَ, but also كِتَابٌ أَنزَلْنَاهُ إِلَيْكَ مُبَارَكٌ لِيَدَّبَّرُوا آيَاتِهِ وَلِيَتَذَكَّرَ أُولُو الْأَلْبَابِ. So we are supposed to do tadabbur of the ayat. We are all called upon to do that, to one extent or another, in certain ways or others. All right. And as for tafsir, there's a brief mention of the word tafsir in Surah Al-Furqan, but it's not used. It's not أَفَلَا يُفَسِّرُونَ الْقُرْآنَ. Or tafsir itself is just the way that we describe a scholarly process that has been developed to investigate the meanings of the Quran. So when we investigate the meanings of the Quran, we have something which we are calling tafsir. But is it possible that there's other aspects of being with the Quran, and even in terms of its meanings, that don't fit into a narrow sense of what tafsir is? Yes, there can be. Right? So sometimes defining things can become a kind of entrapment. So then people say, hold on a second, this is not tafsir, so it's not valid. Or then on the flip side, sometimes when people are doing a certain kind of explanation and then something which is of benefit, and then people say, hold on, are you doing tafsir? Don't do tafsir. You're not qualified to do tafsir. Right? So I'm very concerned on a personal level about the issue of qualification to do tafsir, mainly because I want the path for the mufassirin, future mufassirin, to be made clear, and for us to have the systems in place that people can become mufassirin. At the current time, it seems that it's sort of absent from the scene. And certainly doing the degree that I did in Al-Azhar University in the Department of Tafsir, there was no sense at any point that we were being prepared and nurtured to become mufassirin. I don't think that was ever said to us, that this is the goal of doing your current degree, or even the master's degree and the doctoral degree thereafter, right? But there should be places that are nurturing Mufassirin. This is going to get me into another kind of rant. But I quite appreciate the way that Ibn Juzayy rahmatullah alayhi is talking in these quite broad terms, and then he is telling us about what tafsir is, and at the same time he is talking on a higher level about ilm al-Quran, the knowledge of the Quran. And tafsir is just a means of accessing that knowledge. There may be further things that are needed that, yeah, we could add them to what we call tafsir, or we put them next to what we call tafsir. It doesn't matter either way. The question is whether it is of epistemic value, epistemological value, right? Does it lead to knowledge of what the Quran is saying or not? A point here about Tafsir al-Razi in the comments, his munasabat alone are a great contribution. Why is his tafsir, or I don't know why his tafsir is impugned the way it is. It's not impugned by everyone, of course. It's just people are used to certain things, and then they make remarks about things that they're not used to, right? I'm not saying that about the great imams who might have criticized him, but they criticize him also for certain theological reasons, because they didn't agree with some basic premises of what he was upon. But his tafsir is one of the ummahat, and he will get his shout out in Ibn Juzay's introduction as well. Let's have a quick listen to what we've got in the first page.
الباب الرابع في فنون العلوم التي تتعلق بالقرآن. اعلم أن الكلام على القرآن يستدعي الكلام في 12 فنا من العلوم، وهي التفسير والقراءات والأحكام والنسخ والحديث والقصص والتصوف وأصول الدين وأصول الفقه واللغة والنحو والبيان. فأما التفسير فهو المقصود لنفسه، وسائر هذه الفنون أدوات تعين عليه أو تتعلق به أو تتفرع منه. ومعنى التفسير شرح القرآن وبيان معناه، والإفصاح بما يقتضيه بنصه أو إشارته أو فحواه. واعلم أن التفسير منه متفق عليه ومختلف فيه، ثم إن المختلف فيه على 3 أنواع.
Okay, so this is just the amount that we'll take for now, so that we can wrap up very shortly. And as always, Yasin is hot on my heels. Okay, so the different sorts of knowledge connected to the Quran. Know that discourse on the Quran requires discourse on 12 different sorts of knowledge. I mean, I'm not sure this is a very nice way of putting it, you know. Fannan min al-ulum. So a fan, of course, in you know, the first translation that's going to come to your mind is art, right? But sometimes it's better understood as a craft or a discipline. And here when it said fannan min al-ulum, it lends itself quite nicely, just say different sciences, right? Using the kind of that sense of ulum, right? Namely, commentary, tafsir. Yeah, fields would be fine as well, yeah. Commentary, readings, rulings. Well, look, they've said rulings for ahkam, which is my chosen word, which means that they're inconsistent. Abrogation, prophetic narrations, okay, stories, which again, we're understanding that they're saying qasas. Spiritual rectification of the heart, tasawwuf. Okay, they've gone with quite a gloss there. The sources, usul of the religion. So usul al-din is reference to the, not the sources actually. Usul al-din is in reference to the fundamentals, right? In other words, it is the theological principles, right? The sources of jurisprudence. Again, it's not 100% wrong, but usul al-fiqh is understood as the principles of jurisprudence. Or jurisprudence itself may be a translation of usul al-fiqh, because it in itself refers to the principles of law. Or legal methodology, sometimes usul al-fiqh is described as. Language, grammar, and rhetoric. So the difference in language and grammar is this is language is referring to the vocabulary, the lexicon, the words, right, as conveyed with their meanings, and the grammar is the structure of language, and then bayan, which is rhetoric. Okay, so this is within ilm al-balagha, or referring to ilm al-balagha more generally. You're saying here, isn't it interesting he used the word tasawwuf as opposed to a different term? Only because people are maybe scared of using a word that nowadays that was perfectly normal for people to use in the past. And of course, you know, Ibn Juzayy himself has plenty of Sufi lafatat in his tafsir as well. Okay, so فأما التفسير فهو المقصود لنفسه, is that which is itself intended, and the rest of these sciences are instruments which aid it. Okay. So I've written something in my book here. I was trying to figure out what I was saying to myself. Okay, yeah, what I've said here, we'll have to ponder on what he said here. We'll leave this pondering for now, right? As in, you'll ponder it overnight or over the next 23 hours. The tafsir he is saying is that which is itself intended, and the rest of these sciences are instruments which aid it, which are connected to it or which branch off from it. Okay, in the sense of, we're looking at these sciences just now in terms of how they're useful for the Quran through tafsir, which is like the mother science or the core science, and then there are things which feed into tafsir, and there are things which branch off from tafsir, right? But the tafsir is the central thing which is connected to the Quran. We're using tafsir as the mode by which we are approaching and accessing the Quran, right? So the meaning of tafsir is the explanation of the Quran and clarification of its meaning. شرح القرآن وبيان معناه, which seems to be kind of, this part seems to be like two equivalent phrases. والإفصاح بما يقتضيه بنصه أو إشارته أو فحوه. But that's something in addition. So remember I said here, you've got what's going on with the text, understanding the text correctly, understanding it in context. Okay, so all of that can be understood by this first part. وَالْإِفْصَاحُ بِمَا يَقْتَضِيهِ, what it implies and what is indicated by it, either very directly or more indirectly, right? I'm making intelligible what it requires. This is not intelligible, right? يَقْتَضِيهِ, like I said, these translators have often gone with demands or requires. But يَقْتَضِيهِ here is denotes, implies, or entails, either textually by way of indication or implication. So textually is going to instead be explicitly, بِنَصِّهِ, right? So we'll leave it at that. But what my point is, in a way, when he's saying that tafsir is maqsood لذاته or لنفسه, I think that he would agree, if we raise this question with him, that what is really intended in its own right is to access the guidance of the Quran, right? So it is to take the huda, it is to do tadabbur and ittiba'. Okay, so tafsir in fact is intended as a means to accessing that guidance and being able to ponder on the meanings and being able to follow the Quran. So that is a higher purpose than the tafsir itself. I don't believe he would disagree with that, but it's just, he's talking here in terms of sciences, that the tafsir is the central one that we are dealing with, and the other things are connected to it, feed into it, or flow off from it. Okay, so in that sense, yeah, he is indicating it's objective in and of itself, as you're expressing it here, Muhammad. But otherwise, it is not an objective in and of itself, because what's the point of being a mufassir who doesn't take the guidance of the Quran and doesn't follow the Quran, right? That would be not an objective in itself to do tafsir, but it's the objective to access for those higher purposes, right? So he himself is, of course, explaining that better than we can. So we'll end here for today. وصلى الله وسلم على سيدنا محمد وآخر دعوانا أن الحمد لله رب العالمين.